Hey guys, welcome back. Or if you're new here, my name's Chris, and I'm back here again at the Sawmill. This is the Woodland Mills HM126, and today I wanted to discuss the scales that come with the mill. And I had a request to do a video on this. I'm not an expert, but I have learned quite a bit in the 8 months since I've owned this mill. I heard that there's not a whole lot of videos out there on this topic. One person that I watch a lot, it's a channel called Sawing with Sandy. I'm sure a lot of you, especially if you watch sawmilling videos and especially if they're Woodland Mills videos, you've probably saw some of his videos before. And he does a video on the sawmill scales that I think is quite informative, so if you haven't seen that, go check it out. But having said that, more information is always good, I think, and since I had the request to do this, I'll do my version, and maybe if you go check out his channel, check out my channel, maybe I can add a couple things that he left out. I'm not sure, I can't remember exactly everything he went over in his video, but I know I have watched it. But anyways, I'm just going to do my version, show you how I use these scales, show you my understanding, and hopefully you can get something out of it. Okay guys, the scales that Woodland Mills sends you, there's two of them, two magnetic strips, one's yellow, one's white, and each has two scales on it. So I'll just do a brief overview. That the one on the left here, this is basically a tape measure. So if I hold up a tape measure on this, starting at 0, it'll 1 inch, 2 inch, 3 inch mark up exactly. On the other side is a 4/4 scale. This is what is pretty much standard for cutting hardwood boards into. So I'll go over what exactly they mean in a minute, but I'll just show you the other scale. This is the white scale, and it has a 1 inch scale on it and a 2 inch scale. So that's the 4 scales. So now I'll start at the first one and go over how they work. Okay guys, so the first scale that I'll go over is the one on the left here, and that's the one that is the exact same as a tape measure. So as you can see, if I hold my tape measure up here, 1 inch, 2 inch, 3 inch, 4 inch, etc., all the way down, lines up exactly. And this one I find very useful. I'm kind of biased because if you've worked in construction at all, you might be kind of swayed to wanting to stick with this one, being so used to a tape measure. I can show you why. If you see, you can set it up like I have right here. My marker is right on the 5 inch mark on this scale. And why that is helpful, because if you go down here, you can see that you have to set it up this way yourself. But if you mark that right from the top of the bunk to the bottom of the saw blade is 5 inches. So I know that wherever this mark is on this scale, that's how many inches are from my blade to the bunk. So if I want to cut 1 inch boards with this scale, what I can do is go move the scale down to 4 inches from 5 and make a pass, and that'll give me a board. Then I can move it from 4 to 3, 3 to 2, 2 to 1 if you were wanting to cut 1 inch boards kind of thing. And you could go that way, which is, you know, easy math, easy to figure out. I will show you what the issue with doing that is. When you use the tape measure like that for cutting boards, when you move it down 1 inch at a time, you can see that you actually end up with about a 7/8 board. And that's because that tape measure does not take into account the thickness of the blade. So an easy kind of way to think about it is it's no different than, say, you were cutting this piece of wood with your skill saw and you put a pencil mark at 1 inch, 2 inches, 3 inches, 4 inches, and you cut right through that pencil mark with your skill saw. You're not actually going to end up with pieces of wood 1 inch thick. You're going to end up with, you know, 7/8 or whatever the thickness of the blade is that you're cutting through the wood. So that's kind of the problem, if you want to call it a problem with this, is it doesn't take into account the thickness of the blade. Now, there's ways to get around that. Obviously, you could, you know, add it up in your head, add 1 inch, like so, you know, you'd have to go 1 1/8, 2 1/4, 3 3/8, 4 1/2. So, you know, you'd know that if you wanted to get 4 boards, you'd actually have to start at 4 1/2 and move down. But I'm kind of getting into complications here that you don't really need to use. I'm just showing you kind of the first scale and what kind of the problems are with that. So that's kind of the issue with this scale. Now, if you're like me and you're on a farm and using it for your own purposes, it could be good, because if say you want to cut 2x4s and you want them, say, 2 inches thick, but you're not that picky and you don't care about the thickness of the blade, you could just move it down, you know, every 2 inches, and you're going to end up with boards that are maybe 1 7/8 inches thick. But if you're like me on the farm and you don't really care, as long as they're all the same thickness, then this scale can be really good and easy to use. Now, the scale on the right, this is a 4/4 scale, and you can see from my tape measure that each mark, so from 0 to 1, 1 to 2, 2 to 3, etc., etc., they're all 1 3/16 inches apart. Now, the reason for that is that 4/4 lumber, and I'll have to double check this, and if I'm wrong, I'll correct myself through text on the screen, but I'm pretty sure that to qualify for 4/4 lumber, the actual board has to be between 1 1/16 and 1 3/16 inches, and ideally you're aiming for 1 1/8 inches, I believe. So I'll show you some of the lumber that I've cut using the 4/4 scale, and it's this cherry here. So I use that 4 1/4 inch scale, and you can see I'm right around 1 1/8 inches, but like I was saying, they do allow you a little bit of forgiveness. So the reason that hardwood is measured this way is because of woodworkers. So a lot of woodworking projects are finished down to 3/4 of an inch thick, and they want that little bit extra thickness because it's rough cut lumber and some of it's gonna cup, and they need room for planing and sanding. So they classify, you know, that 1 1/16 inch, 1 3/16 as being suitable because it gives them enough extra to be able to finish it down to a finished 3/4 inch product. So that is the purpose of that scale. So I put the white scale here just right beside the tape measure scale so you can kind of see how they diverge, and how if you're using the white scale, each mark kind of gets a little bit bigger and diverges from the tape measure scale. That's because this scale is meant to allow for the thickness of the blade. So if you're wanting to cut 1 inch boards, you can use this scale here and just go from 1, 2, 3, 4, and that leaves you with a finished rough sawn board at 1 inch, or I think maybe 1 1/16 inches. But honestly, if you're getting down to talking about 1/16 or 30 seconds for rough sawn lumber, you know, that's kind of more of a job for a planer in my opinion. So I just call this like a full 1-inch board kind of thing if you're using this. And then on the other side is a 2-inch scale. So this will cut you from each mark, like from 0 to 1, 1 to 2, 2 to 3. That'll leave you with 2-inch boards, or I think it's 2 inches, maybe 2 1/16. But anyways, that's the idea behind it. And I know I had a hard time wrapping my head around this concept at first, but if you think about it, every time you pass the saw through the log, you're losing a little bit more like a little bit of lumber from the saw blade taking it out. So that's why you can't just use the 1-inch scale and go from 0 to 3 and think you're gonna get a full 3 inches, because this scale is predetermined for the thickness of the blade to come out at each mark. Same with the 2-inch scale. You can't just go cut down to the next notch and think you're going to get a full 4-inch board kind of thing, because each mark here has been predetermined for the thickness of the saw blade to come out of it. So if you think about it that way, that's why they need so many different scales. And these are the scales that this mill comes with. So for me personally, and probably a lot of people out there, if you are cutting a lot of dimensional lumber, 2x4s, 2x6s, that kind of thing, these scales, none of them are actually set up to specifically do that. I've almost been thinking of making my own, but you know, you have to kind of improvise. So a lot of the times I'll just use this inch scale and I'll just figure it out. I'll just keep subtracting or adding 1 3/4 inches. So that's kind of like you pre-planning for the thickness of the blade. So if you move the blade up, down 1 3/4 inches on each pass, and it takes about 1/8 of an inch out, that leaves you with something around 1 5/8 inches kind of thing. So I hope that's all making sense. So let's kind of put this into practice. So I know with my tape measure scale here, I could get 5 boards if I wanted to. I could just drop it down to 4 inches, make a pass, 3, 2, 1, make a pass at each inch marker. And that would leave me with 4 boards, 7/8 of an inch thick. But what happens if I really, really want a true 1-inch thick board? I know I'm gonna have to go with this scale. So somebody in the comments, William Percy, gave me this great idea where just take your scale, this one here, and just walk over to your cant and flip it upside down, and I can see that I'm not gonna get a full 5 boards, but I could get a full 4 boards out of it. So I can take this right back here, and because I know that I'm gonna get only a full 4 boards, I'm just obviously you'd want to take this tape out of here. I'm just doing this for visual purposes, but like one way you could go about it would be to just line this up like that, and then you can unscrew this scale and move it right up to the 4-inch mark and make a pass. And you're gonna waste a little bit of lumber because you don't have enough for 4 full boards. So take one off, you might end up with 1/2 inch of scrap or whatever. But then if your scale's at the 4 here, then you just move it down to this 3 and make a pass, then move it down to this 2, make a pass, move it down to this 1, make a pass, and that'll leave you with 4 full 1-inch boards, or 1 1/16, I think, instead of 5 7/8 boards. So that's always kind of the dilemma, I guess, is deciding how best to use the lumber. But if you need 1-inch boards, that's a way you can go about it. And likewise, the same deal, but I'll just go over it again. For this scale, if you wanted 2-inch boards, I know that each mark is a 2-inch board, so at the one here, that's actually pre-planned for 2 inches. Then from between 1 and 2, that's another 2 inches. So I could take it over here again and say, how many 2-inch boards can I get out of this? And you go like that, and you're like, well, I'm only gonna get 2. So let's take our tape measure back over here and set this up like that. I could even set it up to the 3, because there's only so much adjustment in this. It doesn't matter where on this scale it ends up. It just matters that you set it so that the blade is right at the very top of the cant. And then so I know that I can go from 3 to 2, and that'll give me a 2-inch board. And then I could go from 2 to 1, and that'll give me another 2-inch board, and then I'll be left with about 1 inch of scrap or so. So if you needed to cut 2-inch boards, that's how you would do that. And I thought I'd just add this point in case it's confusing to anybody, that when you're like with this scale here, when you're setting it up so that this 5 inches is actually 5 inches off the deck, that's obviously helpful to let you know how much material have you left. But this scale, if you're using any of the other scales, it's not really giving you a true measurement of anything except for the thickness of boards that you're going to be taking off. So that's why when I say you can just stick it anywhere, what I'm referring to is that you can put it at any marker line, and all that is your reference to where the blade is now. So if you know that your blade is right at the top of the cant you're cutting, you can just stick this in at any line that's good for you to start at. So if I say I want to start at 8, you can just stick it in at 8, and that's kind of your reference line for where the very top of your cant is right now. So that's why you can put it in anywhere and move it down to 7, and you know that'll be your 1-inch board. Likewise, why I say you can put it anywhere, because I could start it at 16. It just isn't very good because the tape's flopping over, but you could start it at 16, and then, you know, like as you move down, there's 1 board, 2 boards, 3 boards kind of thing. But just thought I'd throw that extra bit in there to kind of explain a bit more why on these scales it doesn't really matter where you put them, as long as it's a good starting point for you to know where you're starting and how many more boards you want to get out, kind of thing. Maybe I'll just do a short demonstration, because I know I've watched a couple other videos, and I've read the comments, and one of the main things I see people asking is, you know, so show me exactly how I can get a 1-inch board. So what I'm gonna do, just for the sake of the camera, is I've already showed you right now. I've been using this scale, and I know that it's 5 inches from the bunk, but if I take the mill from 5 down to 4, make my cut, I know that I'm going to be left with a 7/8 board, but I know that this scale will leave me with a 1-inch board. So what I'm going to do, normally I'd take the other scale out of there, but I kind of just want you guys to be able to see what I'm doing here, is I'm just going to replace the yellow scale with this white scale. And I'm not really, with the white scale, I'm not really too concerned with where it ends up. I have it on 4 right now, but I'll drag it up to 6. It doesn't really matter as long as you know you're starting in the same place, because with these portable mills, I think it's important to mention that the lumber that you're cutting off is only going to be as good as you are. So, you know, when we're getting down talking to 1/16 of an inch, the line, the marker line here is thicker than a 1/16 of an inch. So you have to be, you know, really good and cautious if you want to get that quality of lumber to, I'm even moving this tape measure down like right to the top of the 6 here. And then you'd have to go down and you know, make sure that your blade is right at the top of the cant there. And then, you know, so now I'm gonna have to make sure that I crank this down and I get it, you know, right at the top of the line for the 5. And, you know, you can kind of see it's either, it snaps in, so it's either like that one or that one. I think that's as close as I can possibly get with this mill. So I'll just do a little bit of a cut here and show you how that turns it into a 1-inch board. Okay guys, so you see I tried to be as good as I possibly could with the tape there, and then when I come down here and measure it, that's as good as I could possibly get to make it a 1-inch board. So if that's kind of what you're looking for to get a 1-inch board, that's how you do that. If you need to be more precise than this, remember you're cutting rough lumber, so if you like really need to be precise, you just need to cut it at like, and if you're looking for a 1-inch board, you need to cut it at like 1.25 inches and go take it to your thickness planer so that you can, you know, be that precise. Yeah, this is meant for cutting 1-inch, or for cutting rough lumber, and in my opinion, you can get it as accurate as the human eye can pick up on a tape measure, in my opinion. So I just thought I'd show you that, because I know in the comments a lot of people were asking, I want to cut an exact 1-inch board on the mill, how do you do that? So hopefully that showed you how exactly you do that, and from there you just repeat the process. You just keep moving it down to the next inch marker kind of thing, and every time, as long as you are that accurate at moving the scale or moving the marker down to the scale in the exact same spot each time, you'll end up with the exact same thickness of lumber. So hopefully that helped. Okay guys, so I hope that video helped you a bit. So just to recap, we've got our 4 scales. This one here, 1-inch lumber. This one here, 2-inch lumber. This one here, it's your 4/4 scale for hardwood. It ends up leaving you with about 1 1/8 inch board for each mark that you go down. That's how they professionally saw hardwood, so it gives woodworkers a little bit of extra thickness so they can finish it down to their finished project. And the one on the left is just your standard tape measure that does not take into account the thickness of the blade at all. So I guess that's kind of one of the big things to note, is the mill comes with those scales that are meant for those four different things. And if you're somebody like me that say wants to cut 1.5 inch lumber, or you want to cut something 1 3/4 inch, they don't have like a separate scale for every different dimensional lumber. So if you're going to be cutting something that is not one of these four scales, you have to kind of figure that out on your own. And I think that's kind of a lot of the confusion, at least for me. I knew when I wasn't too familiar with these scales, you're trying to figure out, well, I want to cut a bunch of boards at 1 3/4 inch. What scale do I use and how do I use it? There is no scale for 1 3/4 lumber, so I'm just throwing that out there, that if that's something you're going to be doing, you have to kind of figure that out in your own head. You know, so if you want a finished board at 1 3/4, you know that you have to drop the saw blade 1 7/8 each time, because that 1/8 of an inch for the saw blade is going to be taken out and leave you with 1 3/4 inch. So you might want to come to this scale and drop it 1 7/8. But then the problem with that is there's only markers every 1/4 inch, you know what I mean? So with these portable sawmills, you know, they're not the hydraulic, really expensive ones. You do need to use a little bit of your own ingenuity if you're getting into stuff like that where the scale isn't already set up for you. But in my opinion, it's not that big of a deal. You can figure it out pretty easily. Like in my opinion, they might even have other scales, like other companies might make scales. I haven't really looked into it, but I was thinking about looking into it, because I would really like to have an 1.5 inch scale that you can just drop down each mark and it leaves you with a finished 1.5 inch product, because I cut a lot of stuff at that thickness. And like what I've been doing for that is, because there's only marks every 1/4 inch, I've been just using this tape measure scale and going down 1 3/4 inches at a time, and that leaves you with 1 5/8 inches, which is pretty close to the 1.5 inch I'm looking for. But just so you know, like if you've just got your mill and you're wondering how this works, there's not kind of like a tape measure for everything kind of thing. Sometimes you do have to use your own brain and figure it out on your own a bit. So just thought I'd mention that, and I think that just about covers it. I hope that I covered everything. I've probably forgot something, or there's probably more questions out there, but if you do have any more questions that you think I might be able to answer about the tape measure or anything else, feel free to leave a comment in the video, and I'll get back to you with any information that I have. Anyways, guys, thanks a lot for watching. I'll see you next time.